Before we get into this episode, there's something that might be of interest that I wanted to tell you about. Scene and Heard, who run this podcast, have been asked by Scotland Food and Drink to undertake a strategic review of the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards. Now, these Excellence Awards have been going for almost 20 years and are a huge mainstay of the food and drink sector. But it's time to ensure that they're still relevant. So if you have ever been involved in the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards, or even if you've ever had an opinion about them, we would love for you, please, to complete our survey. So if you go to the On Farm Twitter, which is at @on_farm UK, and click the link in the bio, there will be a tab in there that will take you to the survey, and it should only take you a very short while to complete, but we would be enormously grateful.
So it's Monty here for this episode of On Farm, and today we're doing something a wee bit different. We're talking about something that I'm quite passionate about, which is point-to-point racing. Some of you listeners might not really be familiar with that, but don't worry, stick with us because we've got two excellent guests and they're going to explain all you need to know about point-to-point. We're specifically talking about the Lauderdale point-to-point meeting, which is coming up in April. And this year is going to be the 75th anniversary of the first running of the point-to-point in Lauderdale. And I've got two guests with me, Charlotte Dun and Tony Hogarth. Charlotte, could you just introduce yourself? Tell us a wee bit about yourself, please.
I am from a family farming background in Lauderdale country. I have been involved in farming and point-to-pointing and national hunt racing since probably the day I was born. I think I would have been at point-to-points when I was a baby, when I was a young child, pony racing, and then later as an amateur jockey. It's a great place to get involved with the local farmers, local areas. It's point-to-pointing is a wonderful stepping stone for young riders wanting to make a career as a jockey, or hunting families wanting to have a go, and it's a very good sort of pastime for all to get involved with.
Charlotte, you're on the younger side. How old are you?
27.
You're 27. My other guest, Tony, who I'm going to introduce in a second, he probably was there at the very first of the Lauderdale point-to-points 75 years ago. Is that fair to say, Tony?
Absolutely, yes. As a little boy, I was at 1948 at Mosshouses when it all began, and just after the war, me and my brother, and we sort about the field and were gobsmacked by at that time, the size and the people wanting a day out because of the restrictions of wartime, that suddenly here was a bit of freedom and people with horses in the country and racing, and that was us on the way to 75 years.
Mm. And were you hooked? Charlotte sounds like she's been hooked since she was little.
Yes, we as a family, both sides, had always had horses involved in different disciplines, and point-to-pointing was one of them. I point-to-point rode myself. I actually rode for Charlotte's parents at one time. I think I fell off once, got a terrible row.
So meaning Charlotte's grandparents, or am I?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
Right.
So I went on, having got started on this, being involved at Mosshouses in the preparation of the course and the running of the event. And when I was quite young, Father came home from a hunt meeting and said, they're needing a secretary, you'll need to do it. At that point, point-to-points generally in the whole country, the organisation was a shambles. And we grouped in 1969, we got together, eventually meeting in London, and grouped the whole country into 14 areas, and we're a northern area. And again, because I was sort of established doing it, and probably spoke out of turn at one point, so they said, right, you're Northern Area Secretary. And I did that for 50 years.
You did it for 50 years?
Yes.
Glutton for punishment.
And it came a long, long way in the development of the sport, and I think how primitive and crude it was at the beginning, and to the very slick operation we have now, which is really just a scale down of jump racing, national hunt racing.
For people that aren't really 100% familiar with it, what are we talking about? Is it scaled down version of national hunt racing? What is point-to-pointing?
Like I said, it's a very good stepping stone to sort of find your riding style, learn sort of race pace, learn race riding, but it's also a great opportunity for those that, want to have a go at amateur level to get involved in a really exciting sport.
So I suppose, is that the key thing, for people that are more familiar with maybe football or rugby, is point-to-point your kind of East of Scotland League type affair, amateur rugby, amateur football, as opposed to what you might see on the telly on ITV?
I would say so. I would say so, yeah. And I think it's a great place for young horses to progress, and it gives them a little bit more time to mature. They can work on their jump, and the fences are smaller, a little bit more inviting for young jockeys coming through. Again, it's a lot to go straight onto the course and be under the scrutiny of being on the tellies under the stewards. You've got a lot to take on board, whereas point-to-pointing, you can sort of learn the ropes, you can learn the rules before you move in. And as well, it's a great opportunity for horses that have been on the course under rules for a long time. They can step back to point and have a good couple of fun years. It's a really good opportunity for older horses to come back and teach younger jockeys how to ride.
So you've both been there and done it. You've both been jockeys. What was it like your first point to point, your first time racing?
It was actually on the horse for Tony, and it was at Alnwick, and it was snowing, and I was thinking...
Tony's laughing here. He's maybe got different memories of it than you have.
I was thinking, what on earth am I doing? But again, I'd ridden Moulton Brown a lot at home, and I knew him, and he looked after us, and I had a great time. And
you made it round.
I made it round, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The second time was a little bit more eventful because he ran at Friars Hawk at Kelso, and he was sort of coming into the last with a very, very good chance, and he went through the wing. So that was my first big crash.
Oh.
But it didn't put me off, and I was eager to get back as quick as I could.
On that occasion at Friars Hawk, I think wretchedly, the jockey, she was top of the point-to-pointing, and they were very vocal. They were making a lot of roaring and shouting, and my horse was quite nervous, and he didn't know what it was all about.
This was the other jockeys were roaring and shouting.
Yes, right. Terrible. I mean, they were known for it.
Right.
And my horse just shot sideways.
Yeah.
And I've got pictures of that yet because I've used it in safety and design of fences and wings of fences.
Right.
So that's a sort of part of the learning curve for the whole sport.
We're actually, just for listeners' context, we're sitting here in Charlotte's kitchen here, and Brother Graham is a busy farmer, and he's making his breakfast around us, so you might hear the bacon and eggs. Is that right, Graham?
That's great.
But I always think back, and you talk about sort of people learning the ropes, and your dad, he got the job there of commentating as well, didn't he?
So I think it was quite entertaining, because in all of these events, Dad was often commentating when I went through the wing, or if I fell off at Core Bridge and off of Roll Car, so I had a season, and then I was very fortunate that I got a nice old handicapper off of Anne and Ian Hamilton, and we had to sort of barter with Ian Hamilton a little bit, because he was an old favourite of theirs, and he's certainly an old favourite of ours. He's still in the field at Gilston, but he was a monkey, and at the third last he would always sort of get distracted and put in a very dodgy jump, and he unseated me one day at Core Bridge, and I ended up breaking and dislocating my shoulder. And Dad was having to commentate it at this time, but he would always just have to get on with his job and ignore that his daughter was... I think he was possibly... When I did my shoulder, I probably would have been 17 or 18.
Oh, my wee girl.
Well, I don't think it was ever that. I think he was thinking, bloody hell, she's fallen off that horse again. Get back on, God almighty. So he used to... we used to go out in the mornings before I went to uni or school or work and getting horses fit in the winter, you'd be going out in the dark and he would come out with the gate or the quad bike and the lights on and would be chasing me around Gilston Hill going, go faster! And so it was always good fun. And I think, you know, he never unfortunately got to see me ride a winner, but I think he would have been chuffed when I did, so it was good.
That, again, just for sort of context, if you like, and for people listening, you know, I suppose maybe even out with the borders and out with the kind of the point-to-point strongholds, it's very much a sort of family tradition in a lot of the farming families in this area, Tony.
Yes, I think that's up and down the whole country. Yeah. It would be this type of, the borders especially, but in Scotland. But I think Devon and Cornwall will be very similar. West Wales, South West Wales, similar sort of thing. And then towards the middle of the country, Midlands of England, the people who have been successful in business suddenly think it's rather nice. And it is another starter point is that there's livery yards now that they can have a horse looked after, produced, and good horses, racing very successfully. So it gives them a taste for it. And a lot of these people will move on into adult racing, national hunter flat racing. It's all, the whole sport is a huge step to adult racing, and it will be a huge loss. There's anxiety at the moment across the country about the numbers of horses and the cost of putting these things on. But there will be a huge anxiety in race administration, British horse racing, if point-to-points were to fade away, because it is, as we keep going on about, a good starting point.
Yeah, just for people, again, unfamiliar, it's like any level of sport. This is the grassroots. This is the grassroots of racing that we're talking about. And just as you say, you know, people like your father who was a jockey and then got involved in the commentary side of it, it's how it's the foundation that the top pillar that you see on the telly, etc., is built on. The sport, the northern area, and indeed, you know, your point-to-point, as it were, at Mosshouses, has kind of brought people on, brought these people out, brought stars of the future on.
Yes.
Why pony racing? Why point-to-pointing, etc.? Why no, I don't know, show jumping or some other discipline?
The thrill of it is just, there's no feeling like it, and you go fast, and the horses, I think, are exceptional, and you know, I really appreciate every single horse I've ridden in a point-to-point, because it's been great fun. We
will come back to the people side of it, because it's very interesting, and it's really interesting hearing you talk about, you know, the people involved, etc. But I get a real sense that in a lot of ways it is about the horse. It's about the horse and the horses. It's about the partnership.
Yeah. For me, it's just been fantastic, because I've been really fortunate that we've been able to train our own pointers at home. So I get to do the whole from their walk work when they come back from their summer holidays all the way through to the point that they hit the race course, their schooling, everything. And you put a lot of work into it. You know, it's early mornings, it's late nights. I work in an office, so I would have to come back and you'd be running and going to the gym and everything. But it's the most rewarding sport to be a part of, and whether they win, lose or draw, if they've gone out and they've ran the race, it's incredibly rewarding. And one of my most favourite things is actually bringing them home and putting them in their boxes, and when you go out in the morning, you put them in the field and they have a roll and a buck and a kick, and I just think it's you know, that is what I really, really enjoy about it, and it's great running them, and it's a tough sport, and the horses that, you know, they go out and they do their job and they run well for you, they are extremely, extremely rewarding.
But they enjoy it too.
They love it.
Yeah.
They love it. 9 alters, my most recent one that we retired in the spring, you know, you couldn't keep a hold of him, and as soon as you let him go, he would be jumping outside the wings with his ears pricked, and he was just the most fantastic horse to ride. I had so much fun with him, and he absolutely he loved his job, and as did all of the ones that we've had. they don't do it if they when they don't want to do it, but they all love their job, and they're intelligent animals. And I think that I always think a thoroughbred is a bit like a collie dog. They need a purpose, and they need exercise, and they need to use their minds. And I think it's they're very, very versatile, but they need a job to do.
It's interesting you say that, because at a base level, I suppose one of the criticisms that's levelled at racing, as it were, is that somehow it's cruel to the horses or whatever. But for anyone who has tried to control a half a ton of thoroughbred horse, they won't do it if they're not loving it.
Having said that, we have a very well stewarded system in point-to-points, where there will always be 4 or 5 stewards who have some training, and the senior stewards are ex-jockeys themselves. And if there's any nonsense, I mean, there's a lot going on just now to do with the whip on racecourse proper, because throughout racing, and that applies just the same to a point-to-point. And if you misuse it, a whip, the headmaster's study.
So the stewards, were you ever in front of the stewards, Charlotte?
In a point-to-point, I got pulled up actually by my Uncle Geordie once, because I rode a horse that was hot favourite. It was very much so expected to win. The ground was a lot softer than we thought. It was a bit tacky, so it was a bit holding, and it sulked and didn't want to go. So I got pulled in to explain why it didn't want to go. So that's the only time I was actually in front of the stewards in a point-to-point. Other than that, I tended to be very well behaved in the point-to-points.
So the stewards are keeping an eye on all of these things, just to make sure everything's fair and above board, and the rules.
At the same time, our team in the north would be very helpful to a young person starting, and if they see that they're wallowing a bit in the system, they will quietly have a chat with them and suggest things. Having said that, the jockeys, the point-to-point jockeys now, have to be assessed before they're allowed to ride. When I started, you more or less came off the farm, got dressed up and rode.
Off you went.
And you had no training whatsoever. The best training I got was from Charlotte's grandfather. We schooled one Sunday morning near Melrose, where Tweed Bank houses are now. There were schooling fences there. And I remember Robin Dunn telling me 1 or 2 really key things, never forgot them, took me through it. And it just to sort of give you confidence and find your level. Because
we're talking about this as a sport that is appealing, exciting, open to anyone, and we'll come on to that, where there's meetings where people can come along and view how youngsters can get involved. But actually, we're sat here with Charlotte and Tony because these are people with families who have been involved in the point-to-point scene for a long time. Tony's just referenced your grandfather. I mean, is there not a story about him being riding in one of the first?
Yeah, he was. I think he rode in one of the first point-to-points at Mosshouses, and he always used to tell me that it was all stone walls back in the day, and you would go out in your hunting coat, and they would put lead in their pockets. But my grandfather, he was quite small. He probably wouldn't have been that heavy. He was a hard-working farmer. So he had to carry quite a lot of lead in his pockets, and I think when he got off the horse, he crumbled to the ground because the lead was so heavy he could barely. But he used to tell us all the stories, and my grandmother as well. She was great fun and used to ride in them as well. And I think it's point-to-point, and the community is almost like a big family, and it sort of stays with you right through, and you make friends and connections that stay with you all the way through your life. So
to pick up on Charlotte's point about Robin and that fall, I can remember it, and there's a picture of him being helped to his feet with this lead in his pockets, and those days their riding helmets were little more than pudding bowls over their heads. No straps, nothing like that. And I think his had come off. But there he was, started. And I would suggest it was about 10 years later he rode the winner of the Cheltenham Fox Hunters.
Really?
He did,
Right,
yes.
okay.
On a horse called Bright Beach.
Right, okay.
Did.
So there you are. So that was maybe one of this kind of first, because that was the start of the local point-to-point, Mosshouses, etc., and that was maybe his first race, as it were, and then 10 years later he's at Cheltenham.
Yes.
They went right through, and they again, it was very much sort of born and bred into us that Robin and Sheila, Grandy and Grandpa, they had point-to-pointers, they both rode, they both trained. Then my dad had, he started riding and sort of went on to train, and he had a great horse called Car and Donna, which I think was his pony club pony, really. It was a tiny little thing, and it won loads of point-to-points and ended up winning a BMW at a series final at Chepstow, was it? So yeah, they had an absolute ball of a time.
How did he go from a pony club pony to winning a BMW?
I think Tony will need to tell you that story in more detail.
Well, they had Robin and Sheila had a great friend in Ireland, Donegal, and he was involved. He was a vet, retired. He was a vet. They asked him to source a horse for the boys. Anyway, Cardona arrived, and he wasn't big, but a very game little horse. And the ambition of Michael, helped by his parents, got him started in point-to-points, and that had qualified for the BMW. There was a point-to-point series with his final at Chepstow. I think the next year, Gordon had a shot too. That wasn't quite so successful, but it gave those boys a huge start in the sport. And the old BMW ran until it ran out, which might be about 10 years.
Yeah.
The northern area, as you've referred to, and you were talking about Chepstow being a sort of championship, but the Lauderdale point-to-point, as we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of, is in a northern area circuit. Tony, you said you were secretary of the northern area circuit for 50 years. What's the northern area? Where is that, and what's involved?
When the country was divided up in 1969 into areas, just came together in a natural sort of way by the people who were competing and organising, and it was all very linked to the hunts in the area. And so the natural boundary was really the Tyne Valley right through into West Cumberland and points north. The most northerly is Fife. It was a very old established meeting. We had them out at Bogside, and the old race course was converted to a point-to-point course down into Northumberland, Alnwick, 3 meetings on that course, and then across to Cumberland, West Cumberland, hugely popular. Wretchedly, those have gone, but we still have 14 point-to-points in the northern area, where the most we ever had was 80.
And for that, for people that want to find out where there's a meeting, how they can go along, there's a northern area website, is that right?
The meetings each have their own website.
All right.
There's a northern area social media page that updates all of the
On Facebook.
On Facebook,
right.
That you can find all of the meetings and all of the details. And then there's a Weatherby's point-to-point that gives you the fixture list of all of the point-to-points up and down the country.
And all of these things, all of these meetings, anyone can go along and see some great sport.
Anyone can go along. You can take your family, take your picnic. There's always sort of food bits there. It's a great day out to
a beer tent.
There's always a beer tent.
Yeah.
It's a great day out. Family, friends. It's very relaxed, and you can, like I say, you can take your kids, you can take your dogs.
You would often want to take your wellies and a good heavy coat.
Yeah.
But if you get into it and get involved, there's a lot of camaraderie through the spectators. And the picnicking that goes on at the cars, most point-to-points, car parking, is got a commanding, ours especially, commanding view of the course.
Yeah, because that's kind of the point, if you pardon the pun, of where the courses are. They tend to be maybe in a sort of river hawk or on a hillside or somewhere where there's almost like a natural, what's the word I'm looking for, amphitheatre, where you can have your picnic, you can have your crowd, and they'll see the action. The course is below them or looking onto a hillside in front of them, or like Mosshouses.
Or in the case of Annick, looking out over the North Sea. It's a wonderful vista.
Yeah.
You know, a car park that looks over the course. On a good day there, it is a lovely place to be.
It's lovely, yeah.
I think to follow on from that, for the uninformed, there's first of all, there's 6 or 7 races, and they're all pitched at different levels of horse and jockey standard. Before each race, they're half an hour apart. There is a parade ring where the horses that are going to race parade. There are bookmakers, so you can have a little flutter and watch the race from the car. There are 8 jump steeplechase fences on the circuit. They go 2 and a bit times round. A race is 3 miles. They jump 18 times in the 3 miles. So the horse has to have some stamina, so does a jockey, some stamina to do that.
The horse has to have some stamina because, you know, as we're describing, it's on a hillside as well. So there's a climb on the Mosshouses.
Oh yes,
isn't it?
and which would happen at most point-to-point courses. Yeah. There's a degree of countryness. It's not in white rails and the formality of a race course. It is created out of farmland.
Well, it was originally, as Charlotte said, her grandfather was jumping the stone dikes round the fields.
Well, half of them were stone. I remember they took the copestones off and put a turf on top. I think it would fill any modern point-to-point jockey with absolute horror now. The early meetings, I actually liken it to what we now call team chases, which is another discipline for horses out there. Point-to-points was more like that. They've developed the proper steeplechase.
I mean, originally, way back, a point-to-point was kind of what it says, wasn't it? It was start at one point and race to another point across the country. A steeple would be the point they maybe chose, church steeple.
In the case of Lauderdale, I'm told, before the war, must have been back at the end of the 20s, is they met at
100 years ago, Tony. You're not that old. No.
I wasn't there.
No, you weren't there.
They gathered, I don't think it would probably be 1 race or 2 at the most, at a tower at Blue Cairn or Ginnyfield Tower by Blainsley in mid Lauderdale, and raced down a vale past over Lancashire and Coombs the Hill and round a tower, a keep at Coombs, and race back, gallop back. So that would be about 4 miles, and take your own line. No bar or anything like that, or metal gates. But just take your own line.
Take your own line, aim for that tower or whatever and go.
Coombsy Tower, go round Coombsy Tower somehow and make your way back. And obviously the first one was the winner.
But, you know, certainly in your day, Charlotte, it's been much more, well, for a long time, we're talking 75 years, but it's been much more a laid out course. But as we say, it's not in the white rails, it's not like you would see it, Musselburgh or Kelso or whatever, it is very much across the farmland. Going back to the race itself, Tony says, you know, the horse needs stamina, the rider needs stamina. You're jumping 18 times. You've said that, you know, you enjoy it. The thrill. What does it feel like? What does point-to-point racing feel like?
When you're on a horse and you get into a nice rhythm, it's the best feeling in the world. When they jump away, they settle in the race, and it's hard to explain, but it's that is one of the best feelings when you know your horse is, it fills its lungs. At Mosshouses, for example, you go up the hill and you also just let them come up the hill, and then they start to freewheel back down, and they sort of fill their lungs. So when they turn into the home straight, that they'll really gallop away from underneath you, or you hope that they do anyway. And it's just a fantastic feeling. And like I said, you put a lot of time and effort in getting them fit, getting yourself fit, and when it all comes together, it's just you probably live on a high for about 3 days after. So it's great. It's really good fun.
Tony, you've ridden a few in your time.
Yeah.
Does the thrill still stick in your mind?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as Charlotte said, if you're a good jumper and you've got petrol in the tank, I was thinking of Friars Hawk, where there's a sort of row of fences up the river beside the Tweed. Yeah. And if you go into that with a bit of petrol in the tank, it does give you a hell of a good feel.
Yeah.
And round the top end to make your way home, there's quite a steep hill there. A youth brought up, somebody said, never give up riding up the hill, because that's sometimes where you win the race. And I remember coming over the top of there one day, way out in front.
That's where it all comes together, Charlotte. The training, the early mornings, the late nights after work, etc. Getting that horse fit, getting yourself ready, and then it all just comes together.
Yeah, it is. It is the absolute greatest. It's the greatest feeling. And when I sort of rode my first winner on roll car, it was just the best feeling, ever. And I was really glad I, managed to ride him as my first winner, because he was in the family colours, and he was a great, really special little horse for us, and it was just the best feeling in the world. And thankfully that day I managed to, in the race after, I rode a winner from my auntie, so I rode my first and second winner within half an hour of each other, which was very took us long enough, but it was a great day, and I still remember that feeling and appreciate those two horses for giving us that day, because it was just the best feeling.
So the best feeling, the history, we've sold. I hope we've sold to the listeners the whole experience, and I hope we're going to get a crowd along through this to some of the upcoming meetings, but particularly the Lauderdale, especially because it's the 75th anniversary year. When's the Lauderdale point-to-point, Tony?
Sunday, the 16th of April, the day after the Grand National.
So that's going to be an easy one for people to remember, isn't it? So anyone who's listening to this, who especially, it might be that the only time you ever take an interest in racing is the Grand National, which is going to be on Saturday the 15th of April. The very next day, you could be along seeing the racing live in front of your eyes at Mosshouses.
Absolutely. And the exciting thing sometimes is at these après Grand National, that some of the team that have been at Aintree, quite often the jockey, will appear at his local point-to-point.
Just before we wrap up, we want folk to come along, as I say, the day after the Grand National, go and see these horses live. It's not an expensive day out. I think tickets are going to be £10. However, if you would also like to show your support, especially in this 75th year, there is a patrons package, and you get a lovely badge. If you buy a patrons badge, you get admission to the point-to-point and a bacon roll, I think it's going to be, a bit of refreshment. And I think that's £30, but there'll be details about that if you look up the Lauderdale point-to-point on Facebook, and you can get yourself sorted out as a patron, which would be brilliant to show support. I've been delighted with this episode. It's been great to have Charlotte and Tony. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
And just to say, we've also got some news to put onto this episode as well. This episode, we're actually sponsoring. So Scene and Herd is sponsoring this episode, which is a bit of a break from the norm, but we're doing it ourselves this time. However, we've also got some big news as far as on-farm sponsorship is concerned. Our regular series sponsor, Gillespie McAndrew, have come on board again for another year, so massive thanks to them. It's brilliant that they've been enjoying the experience of sponsoring on-farm. We're also delighted that we've got two new sponsors on board. So we would like to welcome Belle Ingram on board, and that's going to be brilliant, and you'll hear an episode, I'm sure, with Belle Ingram very soon. And we've also got Laurie and Symington from the Lanark Mart on board as a sponsor too, and we are delighted. It's been a long time coming for On Farm to try and get the sponsorship levels that are now behind us, and that's going to be great to allow us to continue to make more interesting episodes, and I hope you as the listeners are appreciating what we're doing. So with that, I guess that's it from me, and bye for now.